Queen Camila walked straight past the dignitaries, past her own aides, and stopped in front of the royal guard. But the guard didn't even look at her or blink, and as she pushed harder in front of everyone in the courtyard, his answer not only stopped her in her tracks, Jigget, but also brought up a term she never thought she'd hear again. Before we show you what happened, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, like the video, and leave a comment informing us where in the world you're watching from. What you're about to see will leave you flabbergasted. The afternoon that would change everything started out like any other ceremonial duty at Buckingham Palace. The air in London in February was biting and silent, the kind of cold that cuts through wool coats and makes tourists cluster closer together behind the rope barriers. The sky was a dismal steel color, heavy with the weight of winter and secrets that had been hidden for too long. The wind was so strong that the Union Jacks snapped like whips against their poles. Tourists clustered behind the rope barriers, phones already out, hoping to catch something worth uploading. It wasn't a big state event, simply a polite greeting for a diplomatic envoy. But even the tiniest royal events draw crowds. It's like witnessing tradition unfold with mechanical precision that draws you in. When people write about this day in the future, they will say that it was the day when 27 years of stillness finally ended. One man's reluctance to salute caused an earthquake that shook the British monarchy to its core. Staff Sergeant Gareth Ashford stood at the eastern end of the forecourt, like he was made of the same stone as the palace behind him. He was 41 years old, tall and thin, and the big black bearskin made him look even taller. You could have cut paper on the sharp creases of his red tunic, and the brass buttons caught the weak light like small mirrors. But the visitors taking pictures of the soldier in the ceremonial attire didn't know this. Ashford had learned to stay still in places where moving at the wrong time could get you murdered. He had been on duty at a checkpoint in Afghanistan, when the quiet between heartbeats can be the only warning you got. He stayed in his position amid mortar strikes in the Balkans, refusing to leave until every civilian in his area was safe. There was also something more the crowd didn't know. Ashford was part of the secret security team that protected Princess Diana in her last months in 1919, when he first started working for the household division. Not the obvious security you see in pictures, but the kind that lingered in the shadows and looked for threats that may come from places you didn't expect. He had been there the night she came back from her last trip to Paris. He had seen the fear in her eyes that the reporters never wrote about, and he had heard her hushed talk with her private secretary about individuals who smile while they plan your abduction. That night, she pulled him away and spoke so softly that it was hard to hear. "Gareth, if something happens to me, like an accident, or I suddenly decide to leave public life, remember that I never wanted to go away. Remember that some people get what they want by making their competition disappear." He tried to calm her down and told her she was being crazy, but Diana only shook her head. "I've spent years learning to trust my gut when people threaten you while smiling. Tonight, looking into certain eyes, I see someone who has been planning conversations like this for months." Ashford remembered that her hands had been shaking while she talked, not because she was cold, but because she was scared. "Gareth, some people in this family consider me as nothing more than a hindrance to their goals. They've made it apparent that my being around is a problem for their future plans." She had held onto his arm then, and her claws had dug into the sleeve of his suit. "Promise me something. If they do manage to shut me up, don't let them change who I was. Don't let them make me a footnote in someone else's fairy tale." Ashford had made a vow. He had kept a vow for 27 years, observing as Diana's memory was gently sanitized and her hard truths were buried behind official stories and charity platitudes. Up till today, Ashford had sent his worries through the right channels. They had been called overprotective speculation by inexperienced staff who didn't realize how complicated royal connections could be. In a tunnel in Paris 3 weeks later, Diana died. He had been carrying that weight for 27 years. He had the weirdest feeling that weight was about to move when he looked across the forecourt today. People who didn't know Ashford thought his style of discipline was ceremonial, but for him it was muscle memory from locations where discipline meant staying alive. He had the 1,000-yard gaze that guards are known for, and his eyes were locked on an invisible place somewhere past the crowd. But his wasn't just for show. The same intensity that had kept him alive through 2 tours of duty when even a second of distraction could mean not coming home. The motorcade slid through the palace gates with the kind of seamless, trained accuracy that only royal motions have. Dark cars with tinted windows and police escorts that looked both conspicuous and discreet at the same time. Everyone knew where they needed to be, and the palace staff got ready with clipboards and prepared grins. The middle automobile came to a soft stop. A liveried footman walked up to the back door, looked at the senior protocol officer for a nod, and then opened it with a flourish. Queen Camilla came out. She wore a fitted navy coat with a little fur trim at the collar. It was the kind of luxurious simplicity that shouts money without being too showy. Her hat was perfectly angled, her hair was clean under it, and she had the same grin she had prepared for countless of similar events over the years. She proceeded through the little reception line as if she were following a dance. A handshake here, a quiet greeting there, and a respectful gesture to the diplomatic guests who had been waiting in the cold. At the rope boundaries, she turned and waved quickly to the crowd, which made the expected sound of cheers and camera clicks. Then she looked across the line of ceremonial guards and paused. She looked at Ashford, who was standing still with his weapon in the right position, and her face changed. Not obviously, she was too good at it for that, but there was a tightening around her eyes and a pause that lasted just a beat too long, like she had seen something she didn't expect to see, or someone else. Ashford could feel her gaze, but his own never moved from that faraway spot. 27 years is a long time, but you never forget some faces, especially when they belong to those who made promises about what would happen to witnesses who were in the way. After saying hello to the envoy, the planned route would have her going right to the palace door, but halfway there, she did something that made every protocol officer in the forecourt nervous. She shifted direction, but not in a big manner. It was only a small modification in her path that moved her away from the line of people waiting to see her and toward the row of guards. Her aides, who were not ready, rushed to change their places. A few people in the palace looked at each other quickly. This wasn't planned. Right away, the crowd noticed. You could feel the change in energy, like when a group of people take a deep breath at the same time because they know something unexpected is going to happen. Phones that had been going down went back up. The talk stopped in the middle of a phrase. Camilla walked straight to Ashford and stood in front of him. She had to bend her head back to gaze up at him through the bearskin. For a short while, neither of them moved. "I think a Queen's Guard sergeant should salute her," she added, her voice just loud enough for the visitors closest to her to hear. Ashford didn't even blink, could not move. The winter wind blew through the plume on his bearskin, but the man within it was as tough as granite. Her grin stayed the same, but her voice got sharper. "Maybe you didn't hear me. I said, salute your queen." Not a thing. His breathing stayed slow and steady, and his eyes stayed on that distant place that guards are trained to look at. His firearm maintained firm in his left hand, while his right hand was in the ideal ceremonial posture. There was a murmur in the crowd. Someone said, "Can he just ignore her?" Another voice said, "I don't think so," but it wasn't clear what they meant. It looked like Camilla was forcing her grin. She leaned forward a little bit, not enough to break the rules, but enough to make her words mean more. "Don't be stubborn right now, Sergeant. You're on duty. Do what I told you to do." The stillness went on and on until it became a response in its own right. An aide behind her squirmed uneasily and looked at one of the protocol officers as if to ask if they should step in. The cop shook his head just little. There were times when you just had to let things happen. "A simple salute," Camilla said next, her voice getting sharper. "That's all I've asked. Show the people that the guard respects their queen." The crowd was now entirely concentrated. Even the important people in the receiving line had stopped pretending to make light talk and were instead watching the standoff in the forecourt. Ashford didn't move at all. He wasn't defiant. That would have needed feeling. He was merely stuck, like he was tied to something deeper than the cobblestones under his feet. And that's when Camilla finally lost her cool. She stood up tall and spoke in a voice that everyone in the courtyard could hear. "Is this how the household division acts now? Standing still in front of the crown?" Some tourists put down their phones because they suddenly felt uneasy. Others hoisted them even higher, knowing that this was becoming something that would make the news tomorrow. "I'm sure," she went on, her words as clear as the winter air, "that ceremonial respect is not optional. Unless, of course, we've reached the point where protocol means whatever the man in uniform feels like doing." The aristocratic edge was seeping through now, the kind of tone that was perfected in drawing rooms, where it was an art form to rip someone down. Ashford didn't move at all, not even a little. The stillness had a weight to it, a presence that was very different from the growing passion in her voice. People were starting to lean forward near the rope barrier. They thought they were going to see a polite ceremony. Some tourists appeared really uncomfortable, like they were watching a family fight in public. Others were glued to their phones, which were steady in their palms. She turned her head to the side and looked at him like he was a conundrum she couldn't quite figure out. "I've always respected men who do their duty, but there are some men who hide behind rules because they don't have the guts to do what they should when they should." That hit like a slap, not loud, not unpleasant, but exact, surgical. A middle-aged man in a navy coat murmured, "Bit much, isn't it?" at the rope barrier. His wife looked at him but didn't say anything, but her face said that she agreed. An American visitor asked her friend in a low voice, "Is she always like this?" The answer came back in a low voice, "This isn't normal." Behind Camilla, her main aide was looking at his watch and glanced at the entrance to the palace. This standoff was putting off whatever was scheduled to happen next on the agenda. Protocol officers were talking quietly to each other, attempting to figure out if they should step in. Camilla's voice becomes softer, but the edge stayed keen. "You might think this is all a show, Sergeant, standing in the cold with a gun you'll never use. But the monarchy runs on traditions like these, and you are here to uphold them, not change them to fit your needs." The crowd's mood was changing. What had started out as a funny interest was turning into something else. People looked uneasy suddenly, like they were seeing something they didn't want to see. Ashford's gun shone in the weak sunshine, and the gray sky above it was reflected in the polished steel. His boots, which were polished to a mirror shine, didn't move at all on the old cobblestones. "A guard salutes the sovereign," Camilla added, pointing to him with one gloved hand. "Those who stand for the king are saluted by a guard. That is the law of this courtyard, and it has been for hundreds of years." A younger aide took a half step forward and spoke more softly. "Mom." She didn't look at him. "Sergeant, not recognizing your queen is the same as not recognizing the crown you say you serve." The climate in the courtyard had changed from formal to intimate, and from ceremonial to confrontational. It wasn't about following the rules anymore. It was about power and who would give in first. She took a deep breath. Her following words sounded like a judge giving a sentence. "Protocol is there to honor the crown, not to feed the egos of people who think they are better than it." The wire dangled in the frigid air, making people mumble. "He's not going to move," a woman with a wool scarf said to her friend. She was right. He didn't. The divide between them was long enough that even the important people had stopped pretending it wasn't happening. Everyone in the forecourt was looking at the space between the queen consort and the guard who wasn't moving. A French attaché whispered to his colleague in the diplomatic receiving line, "This isn't normal protocol." "No," the answer was grim. "Nothing about this is normal." Security guards at the palace began to move around the outside of the building. They weren't doing anything yet, but they were getting ready for whatever might happen next. One of them softly said into his radio, "Monitoring the situation at the ceremonial post." Camilla's voice pierced through the whispers like a knife as she spoke again. "Your behavior is an embarrassment to your regiment," she added, each word sharp as frost, and an insult to the monarchy itself. "I'll make sure you're out of this job before the hour is up." A woman in her 60s stepped forward a little at the rope barrier. Her voice was loud enough for people around her to hear. "That man served with my son in Afghanistan. If he doesn't salute, there's a reason." There was another voice with her. "Some things are more important than rules." The crowd wasn't just observing anymore. They were picking sides. You could sense the change in energy as people's feelings about the person in red became clearer. They hadn't said anything, but they had said a lot. It was supposed to be the last word, the kind of dismissal that ends debates and makes people run away. This time, though, it wasn't the end. For the first time since she had talked to him, Ashford walked slowly and on purpose. His right hand moved on the rifle's stock, pulling it up just enough to make a small ceremonial change. He didn't break formation, not quite, but it was the first clear indicator that he had heard what she said. The crowd felt the change right away. The conversation paused in the middle of a phrase. Even the important people in the background turned to look. His voice was low yet clear enough for everyone to hear when he spoke. He didn't swivel his head or break his forward focus as he said, "I serve the crown. I don't serve people who pretend to be it." There was a gasp from the crowd, but the sound that followed wasn't loud. Aides got stiff. Phones that had started to go down surged back up. A woman close to the front barrier put her hand on her chest. Someone else said softly, "Did he just call her a fake?" Camilla's head jerked back a little, and for the first time she lost her cool. "Sorry." Ashford's breathing stayed constant, which was almost scary. As he went on, each word was spoken with the care of a man who had been waiting 27 years to speak them. "I was and still am loyal to Diana, Princess of Wales." When someone said her name out loud in that courtyard, it felt like the temperature dropped a few degrees. There was a vibration in the throng. It wasn't simply murmurs anymore. There were clear whispers of Diana flowing from person to person. A woman in her 60s among the crowd brushed away a tear. A young man who had been filming put down his phone completely, realizing that this was about more than just a viral moment. Ashford's voice didn't get louder, but it had the weight of something that had been kept inside for too long. She served with honor. She helped the folks. She was the real Princess of Wales. You could hear folks taking rapid breaths behind the rope barrier. Someone said, "He's really doing this," and another voice said, "Good for him." Camilla's gloved hands stiffened at her sides, which was the only clue that his comments had hit home. He went on, each word carefully chosen and spoken with the authority of someone who had been there and witnessed what others had only read about in sanitized press releases. "You lied to get her place, and she might still be alive if it weren't for you." The response was immediate and strong. People gasped, took rapid breaths, and a woman put her palm to her mouth. Someone close to the barrier said they know something, but they didn't complete what they were saying. Even the palace staff appeared worried. This wasn't just being disobedient. This was the testimony of someone who had been inside the machine when it killed Diana. Camilla's carefully kept calm broke down. It wasn't broken, but it was clearly strained, and a muscle tensed along her jaw. The trained smile was gone, and in its stead was something cold and hard. For a few heartbeats, the only sound was the cold wind blowing through the courtyard and the distant snap of flags. Ashford's eyes stayed on that spot beyond the crowd. His voice went back to being quiet, and his hands stayed solid on the gun. But the words he had said were still there, like smoke that wouldn't go away. The fight had gone from a test of rules to something much more personal and dangerous. Camilla didn't move for several seconds that felt like minutes. Her aides stood still behind her, their faces intentionally blank, even though their posture showed how tense they were. Everyone in the courtyard was staring at the area between them. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm but quite frigid. "I have earned my place, Sergeant," she responded, her voice loud enough to be heard without shouting. "And your feelings about the late princess have nothing to do with your duties here. You are a soldier, and soldiers follow orders." Ashford didn't answer right away. The break was planned. It was the kind of stillness that makes the other person have to fill it up, but not letting them rush. His voice was nearly like talking when it arrived. "Protocol, Mom, is that guards salute the sovereign and those who are officially representing the sovereign." He changed his grasp just a little, just enough to emphasize his comments. "Respect is built into the institution, but it is not given to everyone. People can claim titles, but they have to earn loyalty." Camilla's lips formed a narrow line. "You think your view is more important than hundreds of years of—" He smoothly cut across her, never raising his voice. "I've stood on parade for kings and queens who didn't have to ask for respect. For men and women who knew that the salute is more than just a hand movement. It's a sign of trust and belief in the person standing there." He paused for a while to let the words sink in before moving on. Trust, Mom, is not something that is owed to those who forget about the people they replace. The crowd was shocked. People who had been half smiling at how new it all was straightened up. Phones went down. A man with a large coat nodded very slightly, as if he agreed. Camilla's eyes narrowed, but she didn't move any closer. Her voice became weak. "Sergeant, you are out of line. There will be consequences for this." Ashford kept his eyes on that phantom horizon. "Maybe, but I'd rather face them than break my promise." The statement didn't need to be loud to hit hard. It was stronger than any screamed opposition, because it was so sure. For the first time since she had been near him, Camilla's gaze moved away for a split second, but it was long enough for the others watching to see it. And once you see that kind of moment, you can't unsee it. There was no awkwardness after the pause. It was clear. Even though neither side would say it out loud, the conversation had already been settled. "He's not budging," a woman said softly from somewhere near the rope barrier. "And she knows it," another voice said softly. Camilla carefully let out a breath through her nostrils and then turned a little toward her aides. One person stepped forward right away and said something too softly for the audience to hear. She nodded sharply. She turned on her heel and started walking toward the palace entrance without saying anything else to Ashford. Her aides surrounded her like a protective screen, partly to keep her safe and partly to keep the rows of gazing eyes away. No apology, no final order, no claim of victory, simply a retreat that was silent but clear. One of the protocol policemen was already on his radio, talking in hurried, clipped tones as she walked through the archway. This wasn't going to stay in the forecourt. By nightfall, every news outlet in London would be calling around to confirm what their sources were already saying. A senior royal aide walked over to the other security guards with a serious look on his face. Full media blackout on everything that happened today. No statements, no confirmations, and no details were given to anyone. But it was too late to fix things. People in the crowd were already posting videos to social media. The hashtag #RememberDiana was starting to go popular. People all throughout the city were sending anonymous tips to royal correspondents about shocking news coming out of the palace. Experts would look at this moment, historians would pick it apart, and anyone who had ever doubted the official version of Diana's death would argue about it. Ashford had done more than just not salute. He had reopened wounds that the establishment had been trying to mend for years. No one moved for a few seconds after she went under the palace entrance. The courtyard held its breath, waiting to see if the guard, who had just stood his stand, would admit what had happened. He didn't. Staff Sergeant Gareth Ashford went back to being very still, with his gun in the right ceremonial posture, and his eyes fixed on that far-off location. If you had strolled into the forecourt at that moment, you could have assumed nothing strange had happened, but everyone who had seen it knew better. The older woman was still wiping her eyes near the rope barrier. That's the first time anyone has told the truth about Diana in this place since she died. The man next to her whispered quietly. A teen looked at her mom. "Mom, what did he mean when he said Diana was alive?" Her mother's answer was careful, but unambiguous. "Some people get what they want by making sure their competition goes away, love, and not everyone who goes away chose to." The veteran with the regimental tie walked up to the barrier and spoke loudly enough for a few people to hear, but he didn't talk to anyone in particular. "I served for 32 years. I've seen good soldiers follow bad orders, and brave soldiers refuse to follow any orders at all. That man just showed us the difference between the two." A young woman talked to her camera while her phone was still recording. "I don't know what we just saw, but I know it was important. That guard put his job on the line, to honor someone who's been gone for almost 30 years. That's not just duty, that's love." The whispers started off slowly, with people talking about something they weren't sure they should talk about out loud. "That's what real discipline looks like," a man in a big coat murmured to no one in particular. A woman next to him nodded and kept watching Ashford. "It takes guts to stand your ground like that." People slowly dropped their phones, almost unwillingly, when they understood that what they had filmed wasn't just another viral moment. It seemed more important than that. Heavier. Someone in the throng asked gently, "Did he really say Diana's name?" The answer came just as softly, clear as day, and he meant every word. Two younger men who had been speaking since the fight began looked at each other and then nodded very slightly toward Ashford. It wasn't enough to get his attention, but it was enough that he would have noticed it if he had been looking. He wasn't, and he couldn't be. An older man at the middle of the barrier stood up straight and gave a brief salute. It wasn't flashy or done for the benefit of others. It was just a private sign of respect. He held it for a second before letting it drop. Ashford didn't say anything about it because it was part of his job, but the gesture hung in the chilly air between them, and its quiet made it clear what it meant. People didn't leave as fast as they usually do when the other parts of the ceremony started up again. They stayed, their eyes fixed on the lone figure in red and black, who had spoken so little but somehow managed to say everything that was important. Some people whispered about what might happen to him next. Some people thought that the occasion would make the headlines, while others thought that the palace's media team would quietly bury it. But Camilla's absence from the forecourt had changed something very important. Ashford owned the space again, and the silence he projected filled it more than her presence ever did. The last important person went inside, and the forecourt started to empty. The pale afternoon light was turning to silver. London was getting dark like a lovely blanket, but that courtyard had transformed in some way. People were already talking about it outside the ropes. The tourists from the US were posting on social media. The guests from Britain were calling their friends and family. Within hours, every royal reporter in the city would be working their sources to see if what they heard was too shocking to be true. A security guard in ordinary clothes came in through the side door. It was evident where he was going, not to arrest Ashford, which would have made things considerably worse, but to quietly take him off duty before things got worse. Discreet extraction, minimal visibility. Priority is containment, the man's radio said. Ashford could see him coming out of the corner of his eye. In just 30 seconds, his time of truth would be over. 27 years of silence, followed by 2 minutes of real talk. He remembered Diana's words from the night before. Don't let them make me a footnote in someone else's fairy tale. Mission completed. The security guard was now 10 feet away, and a few people in the crowd saw him coming. Don't you dare move him, a lady said. He's the only one here who is telling the truth. Other people joined in. Don't bother him. He hasn't done anything wrong. Diana should be remembered. For the first time in royal history, a crowd was enthusiastically supporting a guard's right to breach the rules. The security guard paused and looked back at the palace for help. The correct thing to do isn't always the safe thing to do. Ashford was aware of what would happen next. There would be disciplinary hearings, questions about his ability to perform ceremonial duties, pressure to move him to a place where he wouldn't be seen by the public, threats to his pension, and queries about his service record. But for the first time in 27 years, the burden he had been carrying felt lighter. Diana's truth had been told in the right place, the place where someone had erased her from history when they were there. He stayed right where he had been all day. The same flawless posture, the same unshakable discipline, and the same unyielding focus. It was the last lesson of the day for anyone who was paying attention. You might have to pay attention to authority, but you have to earn respect, and sometimes, the best thing you can do is just not move. What do you think? Did Sergeant Ashford do the right thing by not saluting her? Should a royal guard ever speak up when someone does this? Or does real discipline entail not saying anything no matter what? Leave your ideas in the comments below. We read every single one, and these talks are more important than you might realize. Hit the like button if this moment moved you or reminded you that real strength doesn't need to yell to be heard. It really does help more than you think. Please subscribe and hit the bell so you never miss our daily stories on the amazing men and women that protect these traditions. Share this video with someone who needs to be reminded that respect can't be demanded, only earned. Your screen is already showing you another Royal Guard story. Click it now, and we'll see you tomorrow with another instance that illustrates the same thing over and over. True authority doesn't need to be recognized. It just stands there, and when it does, even the loudest people find they have nothing else to say.